Why, hello, Patriots. Welcome back to the Patriot Dad channel, where we can discuss current events and modern issues, all while keeping it as real as possible. Today, I wanted to react to Thomas Massie's short movie titled Off the Grid. Credit for this movie is to Free the People, and this movie is available to watch on X. Just follow the link down in the description below. So let's get it pulled up and let's watch it. And I will also be doing a reaction to Tucker Carlson's interview with Thomas Massie here shortly. Stick around for that, and in the meantime, go ahead and check out any of the links down in the reference materials, including our Subscribe Star to get access to the Discord channel, where we are building our community and we can have discussions on topics just like this, as well as many others. I look forward to seeing you around. Let's get to the episode, shall we?
There are a lot of labels floating out there, libertarian-leaning Republican, constitutional conservative, Tea Party, deplorable. I'll go with any of those labels. I don't really get caught up in labels. Look, I've been called a redneck and a hillbilly and a nerd and a geek. I find those to be terms of endearment now instead of derision. This is the Shire. I mean, look at it. It can't get any more beautiful than this. Nerd. Here in these hills, these are the people that I grew up with, and the families that I grew up with are the same families my kids are growing up with. And to come back here and have real interaction with people you know, and you know you're going to know until you die, is very rejuvenating to me. My philosophy is live and let live. And I think it comes from growing up here in Eastern Kentucky, where sort of the motto is, you don't worry about what somebody's doing in their holler if they don't worry about what you're doing in your holler.
Makes sense.
And that comes from the people who settled these hills. They learned to be self-sufficient, and they learned not to poke their nose in their neighbor's business.
Makes a lot of sense.
I was bored growing up.
Is the cameraman going to stand up?
I found that I like to build things.
Or is it his dog?
Make things.
Especially things that would improve other people's lives. When I was in junior high, I invented a flower pot that would water itself when the soil got too dry. And that was for my grandmother, who liked to travel a lot, and she wanted to make sure her plants didn't die when she was gone.
Interesting.
Now, she was paying my brother and my sister to water her plants when she was gone, and I decided to liberate them from their paycheck and invent a self-watering flower pot.
Oops.
Water is life. So a lot of what I'm doing here on my farm is managing water everywhere. Out in front of my house, we're on a hill here, I built this terraced garden, and the water runs off the roof, and we get a lot of water, but all that water off my roof comes down here and waters the garden. So it produces lush tomatoes every year. That's going to be yummy on a BLT.
That is a giant
tomato. Some of these are rotten. These are going to go to the chickens.
There you go.
Eat that.
Minimize waste.
We don't compost because basically everything we produce, the chickens or the dogs will eat. So we don't really have to compost things.
Yeah.
Looks like we got 2 eggs. And that one's still warm. So there's
chicken butt nuggets.
A couple levels of farming. You can buy the offspring after they're hatched or born, but really the next level is when you start breeding your own stock. These chicks were raised right on the nest with the mother, and the benefit of that is we never have to bring them inside and put a heat lamp on them or feed them. They've never been fed little chickie food. They just come out here and eat whatever their mama's eating, which today happens to be tomatoes and bugs. And it seems like a miracle every day that I come out here and there's still 7 chicks, because there are predators right off in the weeds here. There are raccoons, there are foxes, there are coyotes,
there are the neighbor's dogs,
Yep.
and all of them like to eat chicken. I like to say the reason...
I think the people do too. So this is something that's interesting, and I've always wanted to get into it, and I've never really had enough space or the opportunity to do so, is that getting into more self-sustaining type living. I do want chickens. I had a friend of mine, he had a little over 10 acres. He had a couple of very small pigs. He's had chickens. And just seeing the wonderful eggs and everything else that he gets, I also got to enjoy some of the ribs from those pigs. But that kind of living just makes sense. He's out on septic too and is trying to minimize the amount of waste that gets either composted or thrown away. And so it made a lot of sense. Just like Thomas Massie here, he fed a lot of it to the chickens and the pigs. And, you know, you just live that way. Don't buy that stuff from the grocery store if you can get it yourself. It makes a lot of sense. But like you said, you got to be real wary of predators. Foxes love to just kill large groups of chickens. They will just kill them all. And it's unfortunate. I've had 2 friends, in fact, that have lost a lot of their chickens to foxes. Someday, everyone. Someday, I hope we all live this way.
So many things taste like chicken is that everything likes the taste of chicken.
Makes sense.
My dream was to go to MIT. I'd never even visited the campus. I read about this place called MIT. Never been really north of the Mason-Dixon line. And
which is not far from here.
I applied and was accepted. I did well at MIT. It was like drinking from a fire hose. At MIT, I invented some technology, some virtual reality technology that let people touch virtual objects, to feel them with their hands inside the computer. I commercialized this device. I got patents for it. I raised venture capital money. A lot of this happened while I was still in school. My high school sweetheart, who actually grew up on this farm, also went to MIT. So we were doing this company together while we were both students at MIT. That was very rewarding, but my wife and I wanted to get back to Kentucky.
Yeah,
and because we had started the company in our married student housing dormitory, we had hired 70 people in New England. I thought about trying to offer them all 40 acres and a mule to come back to Kentucky with us, but ultimately we had to sell our ownership and separate from the company in order for us to relocate here in Kentucky, where we wanted to raise our kids the same way we had been raised. We bought the farm that my wife grew up on. Her parents still live here. And we decided to build a house and to do tangible things. I had been living in virtual reality. That was my business, a virtual reality device. Getting back to the earth and was important to both my wife and I.
Funny he mentions that, because one of the biggest comments about people that live too much in the internet and too much in virtual reality is that they need to touch grass. So what better scene than right here? Plenty of grass and a dog. Touch grass, folks.
So we wanted everything about our house to be real and nothing about it to be fake. Kentucky was the best place for us to live this dream because there are very few regulations here.
I like it.
I came back here just to blend in. I didn't want to be the nail sticking up. Shortly after coming back here and starting to build our house with everything real, the local government decided they wanted to start passing more laws and restricting what you could do with your land.
Nope.
I thought, well, I can just ignore that and just go on with my life.
At your own peril.
I ignored it for 2 or 3 years. And then I just couldn't take it anymore. And I wrote a letter to the editor to air my grievances with the local government. They were going to raise our taxes that day, and we stopped it from happening.
I wonder what it was going to be for.
All right, so on my farm, there are some very large stones like this, and they're great building material, but they're too big for me to manage. So
I do wonder what the regulations that he stopped were. I don't understand it. Why are we letting so many of these formerly conservative rural areas be taken over by just busybodies and people that want to micromanage other people's lives? Just like Thomas said here at the beginning, live and let live. What are we doing? What are we doing?
What I do is I slice them up using a gas chop saw and wedges to split the stones. So this is a stone where I've sliced into it with the saw, and then drove wedges into it and split it. Eventually, I get down to something about this size, but that's not a nice looking face, so I want it to look good. So I face this with the chisel. So my idea for my house was to build it all from stone and timber that I could find here on my farm.
Okay.
And when I told people that I was going to do that, they were worried for me that the stones wouldn't be good enough, that somehow because they were available right here on my farm and local, that maybe they were inferior. And I'm sure you've seen stones that look like this. This is how they end up looking like this. And when they try to imitate stones that look like this, they're trying to imitate work.
Yeah.
This is a lot of hard work. But I think there's this notion that if something's available locally, it's not as good, that it's got to be exotic, that you've got to get this stone from Italy.
I was going to say
in order
import
for it to
Italian
be
marble.
something meaningful. For me, it's more meaningful because it came from the location where I'm building the house. It literally
Makes sense.
I want a house that's coming out of the ground and belongs here. That's the other thing. The stones on my house match the stones that we're walking on in the ground here.
For a
'cause
reason.
It's the same stone, and it's going to last pretty much forever. We had an ice storm that struck our farm in 2003 and fell a lot of trees on our property. I spent a year with my bulldozer and a winch going into the woods and dragging these trees out. And those are the trees that are here in my house, the ones that nature cut down for me. I just had to drag them to my sawmill and then cut them into the shapes that would form this house. I started studying timber framing, and I even signed up for a 1-week class in Tennessee on timber framing. And when I went there, I learned how ignorant I was, and that the beauty of building a timber frame house.
That is amazingly good looking. And he's saying that those timbers came off of his property, out of his woods. Like, what kind of trees did he have growing on that property? Because you don't want to use just any wood for timber framing, right? You wouldn't want to use real soft woods, I wouldn't think. But again, I'm just ignorant here. I don't know much about it. I would have to take a course on timber framing in Tennessee like he did in order to understand it more. But it turned out looking really good. That exposed timber framing is really nice looking. Well done.
Is that you can make the fasteners out of the same material. The fasteners are wood. The whole house is held together with wooden pegs. But if you study it even more, it's not even the pegs that are holding the house together. There's joinery.
Yep.
The tenons go in the mortises. And then if you lay it out correctly and properly, almost all of the joints are held together just by the force of the house, not by the pegs. So when I found out they were trying to zone the county, that means they wanted to pass a law where we would be required to go to the local government and ask their permission to do things with our property. I decided to write another one of my letters to the editor. 30 people showed up at that zoning meeting. Now, I stood up to speak first, and after 5 minutes, the chairwoman advised me that I should sit down, that I was done speaking. I stood at the podium wondering what I would do next, because I certainly didn't want to sit down. A Democrat in the crowd who had been inspired by my letter to the editor to show up at the meeting stood up and told the chairwoman, he can have my 5 minutes. And she said, okay, Mr. Massie, you've got 10 minutes now. And then everybody in attendance stood up, all 30 people, and said, we're giving him our 5 minutes too. That was inspiring to me because those people trusted me to
with their
speak
time
for them, and they wanted to hear what else I had to say.
So the crazy thing about that is That's true representation, right? Those people trusted you with the time that was originally allotted for them, and that you would take care of their time and use it appropriately. One thing that I've noticed and that I've really started thinking about a lot since watching Bukele's interview with Tucker Carlson has been, who are our representatives actually representing? Now, I do know that Thomas Massie is one of the better representatives and actually seems to care about the constituents that he is supposed to represent, and he does. Unlike a lot of our representatives who could not care less about their constituents because they're really there to represent some other interest. Now, we'll get into what those interests are when we go through Thomas Massie's interview with Tucker in a future video. But so far, I'm really enjoying listening to this and just kind of hearing the origin story of Representative Thomas Massie and where his thinking kind of lies. Live and let live. Basically, leave me the hell alone, government. Makes a lot of sense.
And we stopped the county from being zoned. So they nicknamed this group of people Thomas's angry mob. Ironically, they weren't angry and it wasn't a mob. They were informed and they were organized, and I was helping organize them.
But you know what? To the government, a group of people who's well informed and doesn't want to do the thing that they want to do, they consider that an angry mob. That is a way that they use words and classifications to alienate people. So he jokes here, but I bet you the representatives of the county that wanted to zone his area looked at them as an angry mob.
And that's when I realized you could be an activist and you could change government.
Yeah?
It's 88 PSI. We have a pond that's 200 feet in elevation above the house. It's back here in the woods, and it's at the head of that holler about a third of a mile away. You know, when I visited Monticello, I noticed that they had 10 roofs over everything, and they were trying to catch every drop of water that hit their roofs and then reuse it.
Makes sense.
But I also noticed the next hill over from Monticello was much taller than Monticello. Thomas Jefferson could have built a pond on top of that other hill and used gravity to feed it right there to Monticello, and he could have had all the water he wanted at a water pressure that would have just been incredible. But the problem was they didn't have plastic pipe. I ran 2-inch pipe right here. From that pond down to here, and you get like 0.4 psi per foot of elevation. So I have 88 psi of water, and there's almost 500,000 gallons of water in the pond. And as I use it, whenever it rains, it fills back up. So it'll last for maybe 500 years, you know, if you keep the trees off the dam.
Not bad.
Because without water, you can't have anything. Water is life.
The only thing I would say is maybe not plastic. Like, I think that's where terracotta and a lot of the other materials made more sense. I'm trying to minimize the amount of plastic that I have in my life, which is probably why you've seen me drinking from a glass jar. I promise this is not moonshine. This is just water. But I am trying to minimize the amount of plastic that comes in contact with the things that my family and I eat and drink. So if there would be a way to do it without plastic, I would say try. Try to minimize the amount of plastic in your life, folks. We've just been increasing it, and in general, I don't think it's going well for us. So less plastic. That's my recommendation.
So eventually I was persuaded by the people who were inspired by my letters to the editor. And I ran for this position called County Judge Executive. You have to judge which roads need paved first, which wooden bridges need to be concrete bridges, which dogs need to be caught and which dogs don't need to be caught because the dog catcher worked for me, who would operate the trash routes.
That's weird.
These were things you had to judge. It's not government from 30,000 feet like it is in Washington, D.C. You're in the trenches with bayonets and pitchforks trying to settle these issues. I was inspired to go to other counties and talk to groups that had organized.
One of the messages that I try to get across to people who want to get involved in government is that you got to be involved at every level.
Yeah.
And that even the water board or the sewer board or the school board has the power to take your property either through taxation or outright condemnation. And that's a very powerful thing. And so you need to either run for that office or be very concerned about who takes that position.
I was building a base that would ultimately persuade me to run for this congressional seat. And that's what happened, is our congressman announced his retirement. And these people that I had gone to and spoke to, because they cared and I cared, they got me elected to Congress.
And now I'm in Congress. So I tell people my life, my career started out in virtual reality. Then I came back to the farm, and now I'm back in virtual reality in Washington, D.C. Yeah, one of my sons now, he doesn't like working for me, so he went and got a paycheck. He got a job where he gets a paycheck working construction. He's 17. And now he's got the little stub that's got withholding on it. So there's FICA and federal income tax and state income tax. So, you know, until then, I've been paying in cash. So I asked him, what do you think now, son? And he showed me his pay stub, and he pointed to the federal withholding. He said, I think I'm paying your salary now, Dad. You work for me.
Oh, I mean, he's technically not wrong.
One of the things I regret about my orchard is I didn't label the trees. Like, I thought I would always remember what tree I had planted where. But then I ran for Congress and got elected and went to DC, and I forgot what this tree is. So now I've done something to keep from forgetting. I had to come up with the sign that would outlast me. So I figured tombstones are made to outlast people. So I made little tombstones for my trees that tell me, and the person after I die, hopefully that's not too soon, what the tree actually is. And this is a bell of Georgia. It's a white peach. This is the Shire. I mean, look at it. It can't get any more beautiful than this. And it stands in stark contrast to what lies beyond those hills. Eastward is Mordor. And, I mean, Washington, D.C. When I go there, there's no greenery like this.
And that is so true. Like, I live an hour and a half from Washington, D.C. in the panhandle of West Virginia. Like, West Virginia is way nicer. Not quite as green as Thomas Massie's Kentucky property there, but there's a lot of places around here just like it. But yeah, you get close to these big cities, it's just a concrete jungle. It's an awful place. It's just lifeless. You have parks and you have these artificial things, but it's so depressing to be around. I would much rather just be here in my basement filming and doing other things around my house than be in a big city. I don't know how people do it. I don't know how people's spirit survives living in big cities like that. So I agree. These big cities, definitely like Mordor or one of the other cities in fantasy, but I think DC's equivalent would be Mordor because it is just an awful, evil place. Awful. Just not good.
Man has tried to create something as magnificent as these hills, but he's failed really in DC to do that. There's a lot of glitz and glamour in Washington, and I think it's built that way to impress people and to try to convince people something important is going on there. Here, ducky. So Daddy Duck is the white one. He's the
better looking ones are usually the males.
In their food.
Peacocks.
The white one is the daddy duck.
Well,
the black one is the mama duck.
But the peacocks are the pretty ones.
He's a meat duck. He's a Pekin duck, and this is a Kyoga duck. And she lays eggs, and my goal was to cross the meat duck with the egg layer, so that the offspring would be sort of a dual purpose duck. I learned you don't touch the metal bucket and the duck fence at the same time because you might mispronounce duck. So that solar panel powers this. Now,
electrified fencing.
I can plug a I can plug a fence charger into my house. Anything that's running off electricity on the top of this hill is running off solar power. whether it's got its own little solar panel or whether it's running from my house. The electric wire that connects you to the electrical grid is like an umbilical, like in the Matrix. And the government has a lot of control over your life through that one little wire. If you refuse to comply with one of their regulations, the first thing they do is to cut that wire.
Oh, that's so true. When law enforcement wants to deal with you, what's one of the first things they do? They cut your power. Like, that is a very good point. And being off the grid or independent makes it very difficult to control you. So I really like that he has kind of set up his whole thing. Like his house is like the thing I hope I eventually get to do. There's a lot of things that are gonna have to change between now and then, but that would be my ideal, is that I could run my own property like he's running his. I like it. I like it, Mr. Massie. Keep it up.
And typically the first thing you would then do is cry uncle, because try going without electricity for a day or two once you've gotten used to it. Yeah, one thing that's become apparent to me now that I've been in Washington, D.C., and after having been in the private sector and also every weekend coming back to my farm, is that the folks in Washington, D.C. have no business trying to make decisions about what's most efficient for people back on their farms or back in their businesses.
And they don't know what they're
So there are a lot of
about.
people that have never been in the country that live in Washington, D.C. and try to make rules for the country.
Yep.
And the countryside.
Like with firearms.
Out here, heating with wood is a very inexpensive, practical, renewable way to sustain your household.
Yep.
And in Washington, D.C., the EPA, even without congressional action, has been trying to crack down on wood-burning stoves because they've got this notion somehow that all the trees are going to disappear and that burning wood is a bad way to create heat. Well, you can see over here on my hillside, like literally, even before you get to the real leafy stuff, there's 4 or 5 dead trees right there that will heat my whole house this whole winter, this entire winter.
Yeah.
The 4 trees that you can see will provide all the heat that I need. Now, if I don't go cut down those dead trees and burn them in my wood gasifying boiler, they're going to fall down and termites are going to work on them.
Yep.
And instead of producing CO2, now they're going to produce methane,
Yep.
which the environmentalists say is 43 times as worse in terms of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide.
Hey man, have the environmentalists ever actually made any sense? Have progressives had any standards but double standards? Like he was saying, these people in these cities have no concept of how life is in a more rural area. You have so much deadfall in a area like that, like he said, you can either burn it for heat or you let nature consume it. Either way, you're going to get off gassing. You might as well do something productive with it. Just makes sense. But then again, things in DC pretty much never make sense. So it makes sense in a way.
All right, so this is my boiler room, and this is where all the heat for the house comes in the winter.
Yep.
My children stack wood on these U-boats, and we roll them into the basement, and if we fill up 4 of these U-boats, we've got enough wood to heat our house for a month.
So this is a gold mine to me right here.
Yep.
I found a fallen tree across my trail where the wood has already dried out. You put the wood in the boiler, and instead of burning the wood directly, it gets it really hot, turns it into charcoal, drives off the gases like the hydrogen gas and the other hydrocarbon gases, forces them down into a lower chamber where it burns at 1,500 to 2,000 degrees in a ceramic chamber. And literally everything burns in that chamber.
And the benefit is all of the smoke is combusted
Yep.
in that chamber, as well as the things that normally burn.
Yeah,
So
soot.
all that comes out of my chimney is steam.
At our house, we're producing less pollution by burning dry wood, and it's also a carbon zero cycle. In other words,
because the
all of
trees
the
are going to use it.
carbon that's in this wood was collected from the atmosphere. so that when we readmit it into the atmosphere, there's net zero carbon production. Is that the solution for everybody? No, it's not the solution for everybody. But every solution needs to be tuned to the local environment and the local culture.
Which is why central planning sucks. Because people in a city don't have the same needs, requirements, and conditions that people in the country do, and vice versa. Which is why you're supposed to make as many rules as possible over someone's life as close to them as possible, whether it's local, county, state, but definitely not federal. Federal is supposed to be the last choice. But I also want to do a video, and I probably will here in the next few months, about how almost all energy on Earth is solar power and how almost everything we do with it after that is carbon neutral. Like he just pointed out, burning wood is a carbon neutral process. The wood was created by pulling carbon out of the air. And then when you burn it, it releases it back to the air. So how is coal and wood and all these things not carbon neutral, folks? Tell me.
And that's why it's so wrong for Washington, D.C. to try and dictate that.
Yes.
Our founding fathers didn't want that executive in Washington, D.C. to make all the local decisions.
Right.
So, we've got levels of government, state government, county government, city government.
Absolutely.
And a dangerous trend that I see this in Congress, is that that vertical limitation is now being eroded.
Horizontally,
Oh, it's being
they balance
destroyed.
the power of the judiciary and the legislative and the executive branch. And we've sort of forgotten that. Every time we see the presidential election, we think it's the Super Bowl of politics and we're electing a king, right? And that the legislative branch and the judicial branch will be irrelevant. And the king will just use his pen and his phone and do what he wants. But
You guys
so
don't
we've
push back
forgotten
enough,
that.
though.
People are as guilty as the media and anybody else. And remembering that government is horizontally limited, but they are also guilty of forgetting that it's vertically limited.
And Washington, D.C. is making decisions that should be made at the state, should be made at the county level.
Yes.
Maybe they should be made in your living room.
Yeah.
And not made by any government. But we need to always be working to keep that government in check, because it's a dangerous thing. And I've learned it at the county level.
So my cattle are
He's
on the
not
other
wrong.
side of the creek there in the distance, and we're going to move them over here because the grass has had time to recover here and it's grown tall enough for them to eat. Some people say that cattle are bad for the environment and that you shouldn't eat beef.
They were around longer
because
than we
more,
were.
productive things could be done with the land. And those people really have never seen a farm in Appalachia, because
Yep.
look at this field right here, this terrain. Most sane people would not drive a lawnmower on it.
Awful
It's a
for
hill,
farming.
right? You can't grow any kind of crop here effectively. Some days in Washington, D.C., I feel like this little white calf here. I look around and say, how'd I get here? What am I doing here?
Yeah.
Do I belong here? The farm has taught me how to be more patient. And that's the greatest resource I think you have to have in Washington, D.C. These cattle here, the genetics are the result of 3 or 4 generations of breeding. And I've got mama cows that have calves on their own without a lot of problems. But you can't expect all of that in 1 year or 2 years.
Nope. No, you cannot. You can, but
Making
you won't
food
get it.
for other people and watching them eat it and it provide nourishment to their bodies, that's honest. That's not fake. And something got done and somebody appreciates you for it. And
delicious.
those are concepts that are somewhat foreign in Washington, D.C. I mean, if you think about it, nothing is produced in Washington, D.C. There's nothing manufactured. There's
Regulations.
no food grown. There are very few inventions created, if you will. It's just a place where nothing is created. And a farm is exactly the opposite. There's life happening here every day. I've found out that I can get more money for my animals if I keep feeding them grass, get the calves to an older age, and then sell that beef directly to consumers.
And you know what? That makes a lot of sense. And there might even be years where that's not the case. There might be years where it makes less sense to feed them up, and it might make more sense to sell them as calves. But you know what? That's one year to the next, and you should be free to make those decisions yourself. There should be no government regulation or no anything other than you telling you what you do with your cattle and your things. Definitely not some person in Washington, D.C.
Now, there are government barriers to that, as you can imagine.
Yep.
And the big players in the beef industry don't want any of those barriers removed. So the USDA rules require you to employ a USDA inspector in your facility full-time.
No.
If you want to have the USDA certification. And there's a butcher house 3 miles from here, 3 miles from my house, that does a fantastic job on these animals. And as long as I sell you a share of this animal before I take it to that butcher shop, it's all legal and you can have the meat after it's butchered. But I can't sell you less than a quarter of the animal. And it's healthy, and the U.S. government has no problem with that. But if I try to sell you a steak, and we don't pretend at least that you own this animal before I butcher it, I go to jail. And the big guys like that. Because you can imagine how hard it is if I come up to you and say, would you like to buy some of my beef? And you say, yes, I'm having a cookout this weekend. And I say, great. The smallest order is 300 pounds. But you can go to the supermarket and buy one steak because that has the imprimatur of the USDA, because that facility employed a USDA person and kept them at their facility when they were butchering.
Now, I have some experience with this because people out here in West Virginia do this, right? You order a half a cow or a quarter of a cow. You buy in a share of a cow before it's taken to the butcher. That's normal here. But this whole concept where you have to have a government employee overseeing it, or else if you sell a single steak from that cow, you go to jail? Like, guys, what are we doing? Why are we giving the government this kind of control? It makes no sense. I don't like it one bit.
So the net result of that regulation is, instead of going 3 miles from my house, I have to go 150 miles from my house to a facility that has a USDA inspector, which raises the price and the effort. And then I've got to come 150 miles back with frozen beef without letting it thaw, and then distribute frozen beef to consumers. It's a very difficult proposition. Democrats and liberals want the ability to buy locally and consume healthy food, and they're starting to wake up and realize that the healthiest food comes from your neighbor where there's accountability. It doesn't come from some centralized industrial food production system that's corporate.
And this is what we're going to be eating: beef brisket.
Heck yeah.
You cook this low and slow.
Sweet.
So for me, I mean, I like the fact that it's, quote, green, to be off the grid or to be running on solar power. But for me, it was about independence.
Sunlight hits the panels. Panels produce DC electricity. These devices take that DC electricity, step it down, and charge the batteries. Now we've got DC power, but we need AC power to run common everyday appliances in the house.
Correct.
That's what these puppies do. These are inverters. They take 48 volts from the batteries and produce 120 volts AC, alternating current, the kind like your blender wants to use or your air conditioner. And that's what these components do. The thing that's going to be the next breakthrough in energy production is actually energy storage.
Yeah.
The world doesn't need a better solar panel. The world doesn't need a better windmill.
It needs a better battery.
Needs a better battery.
Yeah.
So next to the big Tesla, we've got the little Tesla here. This is an electric go-kart that my son built. And we charge it with the solar panels. And then, you know, in a zombie apocalypse, when the zombies take over the refineries and they're shut down, we will be able not only to drive a car off of the solar power from the house, but we'll be able to also have a go-kart.
And it's really neat that his son built that. Like, that's the kind of farm engineering that most people don't understand if you grew up in a city. Like, these farm kids are not dumb. The perception in the cities is that farmers are dumb. Farm kids are dumb. Like, all those silly, simple farmers. Like, I spent 5 years living in Nebraska. If I learned anything living there, it's that farmers have a lot of ingenuity and know how to do stuff. Most people live in these cities don't know how to do things anymore. They just hire everything out. They don't know basic carpentry. They don't know drywall. They don't know electrical. They don't know anything. They just pick up a phone and call somebody. So there's just no relation between a city dweller and a rural person anymore. They're so disconnected from each other.
When I started farming this property, I thought about my mission statement. So my mission statement and my mission in life on this farm, my goals for this farm, is to come up with a sustainable, money-producing model. That's why I have cattle on this farm. I don't need 50,000 pounds of beef. That part of it's not a hobby farm. That part of it is figuring out a business model that the next generation can use, whether it's my children or somebody else's children. I don't want to see all of the trees stripped at once and it logged. I would like it to remain very much like it is now.
Very nice.
Here's the thing about the hobbits that go to Mordor. Most of them succumb to the intoxication of power.
Yep.
In fact, I've got my Precious here with me. This is my congressional pin.
Ugh.
And I usually just keep it in my pocket where I can reach in and feel it. It gives me some comfort, but I try not to ever wear it more than I have to. Because when you wear Precious, and every congressman has one of these, and they love to wear them, you become intoxicated. And it's the subtle things that you don't even realize that are happening when you're wearing this pin. For instance, the Capitol Hill police get out of your way as you walk toward them. I once bumped into a policeman because I didn't have Precious on, and he didn't yield to me. And it's those subtle things, like when you get in an elevator with 10 people on Capitol Hill and they look down and see you're wearing Precious, they all quit speaking. You know, they'll hold the door open and let you exit first.
That's weird.
When you're walking down the hallway wearing Precious, people won't make eye contact. They'll look away and look down when you're wearing Precious. And all of those things,
I don't like that at all.
as odd as it may seem, make the hobbits who wear Precious feel powerful. And I can feel it myself. And it's a scary feeling because I know if I wear this for too long, it's going to affect me, and not in good ways.
The fact that he recognizes that, though, says a whole lot. There's a lot of people, both sides, the uniparty members that are not this down to earth, that probably do not even recognize that they have succumbed to the power of Precious. Interesting hearing an active Congress member talk about it, though, about how people move out of your way, divert their attention, stop speaking, treat you like you're somebody better than the others. I really don't like that.
I think one of my weaknesses and one of my strengths is that I'm a romantic. My dream is not to be a politician. My dream,
None of them
I'm
should.
living it here on my farm already, and that is marrying my high school sweetheart, building our small castle with our own resources on top of a hill. This is actually the farm my wife grew up on. And to be raising a family here and teaching them values like self-sufficiency, that's my dream. My dream is not to lord over people from a central government somewhere. And I get to live that dream one day a week while I'm serving in Congress 6 days a week.
Ugh.
And that's important to me.
And I'll cut it there because I don't want to get hit for music copyright. But you know what? That was a really neat little film. And it tells us a lot about why Representative Massie is the way that he is. The time that I spent living in rural Nebraska, as well as the panhandle of West Virginia, has been very different than where I grew up, because I grew up in Orange County, California. Very different living in Southern California in a city than it is living in rural Nebraska or West Virginia. Now, I do work in a small city in Northern Virginia, so I do get exposed to the city every day. However, returning home to the nice, kind people of West Virginia reminds me a lot about the important things in life. And my kids remind me of the rest of it. I think a lot of us just need to get that perspective back. And the people that are in charge in Washington, D.C. need that perspective themselves. Stop working for somebody else and start representing your constituents. Thank you to all of you that made it to the end of the video. I greatly appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you like it and leave a comment below. If you want to see more videos like it, please make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the little bell icon so that you can be notified when I upload additional content. If you have a recommendation for a future video or a topic that you want to see on the channel, please leave it in a comment below, as the majority of the content on this channel come from viewer recommendations from people just like you. Again, check out all the links down in the reference material and help support the channel in any way that you choose, whether it's merch, whether it's joining the Subscribe Star in the Discord community, or whether it's just leaving a comment. I hope all of you have a wonderful week. Take care of yourselves. God bless, and bye for now. Go ahead and check out one of the links on the screen now to either subscribe to the channel and see the rest of the videos of the channel, or one of the carefully selected videos that you may wish to see that YouTube has used its algorithm to select for you.